So Putin just made his presidential address to the Federal Assembly, and we have to analyze this. Now, it has been almost 12 months into the Ukraine conflict, and the chaos isn't going away anytime soon. Now, the speech was just a few days shy of the one-year anniversary, and it also coincided with Biden's sudden visit to Ukraine, promising another $500 million of support again. Now, what we are seeing is a battle of narratives, and I want us to focus on the economic takeaways in this speech. And let's remember that this is a battle of financial attrition between Russia and the West. Now, Russia's aim is to keep inflation high in the West and really outlast them. While the United States and their allies, the plan is same from day one: cut away Russian revenues. And this speech is important because it sheds light into Putin's mindset and what plans he might have ahead for the world. And I'll be reading excerpts from his translated speech directly from the Kremlin's website and breaking down what's going on. And at the end, I'll be giving my opinion on what we have to prepare for, because both Putin and the West, they aren't backing down. Now, the first point Putin made was how expensive the war is. And I think we all know this by now, right? The West is throwing tons of ammunition, weapons, and battle tanks towards the Russians, and this is costing a lot of money. And according to Putin, he has already spent over $150 billion on helping and arming the Kiev regime. To give you an idea, according to the OECD, the G7 countries earmarked around $60 billion in 2020-2021 to help the world's poorest countries. Now, $150 billion is a lot of money, and this amount is only going to balloon as the months roll by. And as we know, a lot of this money is going to flow into the military-industrial complex, right? Now, we have Ukraine requesting for wings for freedom, asking the West for fighter jets, while we have Lockheed Martin standing ready with F-16s. So this conflict is just going to feed more money to weapons. And where is this money going to come from? It's going to come from deficit spending, guys. And this is the big problem with war financing. You are just increasing the money supply to blow up stuff. The money doesn't increase production capacity or the supply of goods and commodities. In fact, it decreases the supply of commodities because you need to buy oil, base metals, and rare earths to really build the tanks and missiles, right? So now you have a situation of more supply chasing fewer commodities. And this is just going to make the inflation problem worse. Maybe not immediately, but definitely down the road. Now, plus the United States already has an insane debt problem. We have a US debt ceiling crisis that might explode in June, and with over $100 billion spent on Ukraine just in 2022, this is just going to make the debt crisis even worse. There are no winners in war, everyone gets poorer except the defense contractors. And the second point is something that the whole world is very familiar with, and that is the sanctions on Russia. Now, right now, the country has over 14,000 sanctions slapped on it, more than all the other countries on this list combined. So Russia is now truly the most sanctioned country on planet Earth. And according to Putin, they tried disrupting economic ties with Russian companies and depriving the financial system of its communication channels to shutter our economy, isolate us from export markets, and thus undermine our revenues. They also froze our foreign exchange reserves, tried to depreciate the ruble, and drive inflation to destructive heights. And what he was referring to is very obvious. It is the cutting away of Russia from the SWIFT system and the freezing of $300 billion of Russia's central bank assets, right? And this is the primary reason why we are seeing de-dollarization accelerate like never before. This is also why we are witnessing record central bank gold buying in 2022, with the IMF themselves admitting that sanctions played a very big part. So the sanctions have backfired on the West, especially when it comes to the dollar status as the reserve currency. We have China on a campaign to de-dollarize the world. Their US Treasury holdings have dropped to a 12-year low, dropping by over $160 billion. And what are they buying instead? They are buying gold. They have been announcing their gold purchases to the markets for the past 3 months, breaking away from their traditional silence. And this is a cry to the world that they are moving away from the dollar, and perhaps other countries should join them as well. And in a shocking announcement to the world, we have Saudi Arabia saying they aren't bound to the US dollar for global trade. They would consider settling in other currencies. So if the EU, they decide to confiscate Russian assets and they take the assets, they give them to Ukraine, this could break even more trust and spark another de-dollarization fire. Now, the third point is undoubtedly a victory that Putin wants to show the world. And it's about how resilient the Russian economy is and how it is not yet collapsing. Now, this is important because he also needs to show the economic partners, China and India, that they aren't supporting a lost cause. Putin still has to play the PR game as well. And according to him, some predicted that the economy would shrink by 20 to 25% or maybe 10%. However, in 2022, the GDP declined by 2.1%, and we must be mindful of the fact that back in February and March of last year, some predicted that the economy would be in free fall. So Putin is defying the expectations of many analysts that believe the Russian economy would be on fire. Now, no doubt a negative 2.1% is still a recession, it's not good, but it is still much better than a negative 10 or 20% contraction. And if we look at IMF projections, they are actually projecting an economic growth of 0.3% for Russia in 2023. And that is higher than the forecast for Germany at 0.1% and the UK, which is expecting to enter a recession this year. And why is Russia still surviving? It is because their oil sales are still going strong. We have China and India still buying cheap Russian oil, and this win-win proposition is going to continue. And let's take India for example. Their Russian oil imports surged to a new record in January, hitting 1.4 million barrels a day. In fact, even the United States won't sanction India for buying Russian oil, despite calls from Ukraine to punish them. And for China, their flows of Russian oil has also grown month over month, reaching a new peak of 1.5 million barrels in crude oil alone. We also have the Chinese diplomat Wang Yi telling Putin that other countries won't affect their relationship. So it's safe to assume that this state of affairs will continue. China and India will keep buying Russian oil and revenues will keep flowing in. But that's not all. This partnership is going to evolve beyond just oil sales. And in the speech, he mentioned how we will continue working with our partners to create a sustainable, safe system of international settlements, which will be independent of the dollar. He goes on to add how we are not the ones reducing transactions in dollars or other so-called universal currencies. They are doing everything with their own hands. Now, Putin is obviously referring to the de-dollarization trend and how the sanctions have backfired. But let's focus on his first statement. In order to create a system of international settlements away from the dollar, you have to come in two parts. By creating a new common currency, something like the euro for example, and by developing a transaction system to challenge SWIFT. Now, obviously creating either is a tall order. It won't be easy, but Russia is taking steps because it is now an existential crisis. They are cut off from the dollar system and they need to find alternatives. And we have Lavrov mentioning how a new common currency will be discussed during the BRICS summit. But these kind of moves will take years to materialize. But here are the concrete steps Putin is taking. He is moving to remove both dollars and euros from the National Wealth Fund, and in exchange, he's doubling the share of gold and yuan assets. And the aim is to fully de-dollarize Russia first. And we can see that China-Russian trade is almost now completely done in yuan and ruble. Now, since the conflict started, bilateral trade between Russia and China has skyrocketed, and they aren't using dollars. And that's not all. Russia has also rapidly increased their gold reserves. It was only 33 million ounces back in 2014, and by 2021, they have more than doubled to 74 million. So Putin's plan is an ambitious one, and his de-dollarization push is starting with China first before engaging with the rest of the world. And let's move on to the fifth point, which is very interesting, and it involves building up the Russian economy. And we know that war is costly for both sides, and there's a big temptation to pour all your money into the weapons industry. But that will start a decline of your entire economy as a whole, and that's what Putin is trying to avoid. He's trying to prevent that. And he mentioned how national defense is the top priority, but in resolving strategic tasks in this area, we should not repeat the mistakes of the past and should not destroy our own economy. And one clear example he highlighted was the rise in their agricultural production, which is obviously a necessity. You need grain and wheat to feed your population, right? You just can't mine gold and palm oil. That is not enough. According to Putin, agricultural production recorded two-digit growth rates last year. By the end of the agricultural season, that is June 30th, 2023, we will bring our grain exports to 55 to 60 million tons. And this is important because it is another revenue stream for Russia. If we can see the price of wheat is around $300 per ton, so this could represent $18 billion more of additional revenue. And this means Russia can feed their population and still export food to the world just for revenue. They are diversifying away from just oil exports because of the price caps. Now, I believe this is one area where the West won't impose any sanctions on wheat exports, right? Because Russia is still Europe's breadbasket. But if they do, we can expect food prices to climb globally once again. So we can see what's happening here. Putin's plan is also to build up the rest of his economy and develop the rest of Russia's commodity sectors. But all this development is useless if Russia still uses the same logistic corridors controlled by the West. And we have seen this from the price caps. Russian revenues fell because Western ships and insurance couldn't ferry Russian crude above $60. So Russia's trying to skirt around the sanctions by developing their own trading routes and infrastructure. And according to Putin, we will expand promising foreign economic ties and build new logistic corridors such as the Moscow-Kazan Expressway. This will allow us to considerably expand our ties with Southeast Asian markets. Now, he's trying to further connect Central Asia with Southeast Asia to move commodities to friendlier markets, right? And this shift from Europe to Asia couldn't be more obvious. And here's the interesting part. Russia's also looked to develop their ports to extend the oil corridors to the east. We will develop the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov ports. This will open up new routes for business cooperation with India, Iran, Pakistan, and the Middle Eastern countries. And this means that oil is going to keep flowing towards Asia, and oil sanctions will become less and less effective over time. So I wouldn't bet on Russian revenues collapsing anytime soon. They will still have money to continue fighting on. Yes, the euro's price have fallen to crude, hovering just above $52, but we have seen that the Russians are starting to cut oil production as well. They announced a cut of 500,000 barrels a day, or 5% of their production, just a few weeks ago, and there have been reports that Russia is now looking to slash exports from Western ports by up to 25% in March and April. That is a significant amount of oil. And this is in line with Putin's plan to move trade closer towards the east and ramp up energy inflation from the west, right? So if you're in Europe, another energy crunch might be coming soon. And the final takeaway is an interesting one. I want us to flash back to 2022 and recall all those Russian oligarchs whose super yachts were seized, right? Well, Putin also made an address to the ultra-rich in Russia, and he mentioned how the image of the West as a safe haven for capital was a mirage. Those who failed to understand this in time, who saw Russia only as a source of income and planned to live mostly abroad, have lost a lot. And he goes on to poke the oligarchs further, telling them, "Trust me, not a single ordinary citizen in our country felt sorry for those who lost their assets in foreign banks, lost their yachts or palaces abroad." And why is he doing this? It's really simple. He wants their money back in Mother Russia to reinvest back into Russian industries. And just in 2022, the oligarchs have lost over $96 billion, and we can expect this number to keep growing. And that is a lot of money being frozen away. And his comments are rather scathing, saying that the oligarchs will always remain second-class strangers who can be treated anyway, and their money, connections, and their acquired titles of counts, peers, or mayors will not help at all. Now, I think this is going to be the hardest objective to accomplish of the lot. If the oligarchs they want to leave, they will leave. So whether Putin's plan will work on this front remains to be seen. Now, here are my thoughts, guys. And I'm only going to touch on the economic impacts because the full speech is over 13,000 words long. Now, I believe Russia is entrenching for a long battle for the long war, and it's obvious that their economy is more resilient than many in the West believes. Now, I don't sense any panic, but detailed plans outside to expand trade to Asia and a willingness to de-dollarize the world. He's trying to shape a new Eastern Bloc, a new power that is independent of the West, and that's why we are hearing hints of creating a new common currency and a new system of international settlements. So we could see many more energy dislocations in the market. The dollar will also gradually lose more market share in the years and decades to come. And this speech isn't just about how Russia is surviving, but it's more about how the world is truly deglobalizing. But the biggest takeaway we need to realize is that the conflict is far from over. Russia is beginning to develop their own economy, and as long as they have the support from India and China, they will fight on. It's also interesting that Putin drew many inferences from history, drawing parallels back to the 19th century, and this shows that he's on a mission to unify the entire country behind him. But whether his plan works will depend on the execution, right? Now, what we are seeing is a confident speech, but how it will materialize, we'll have to wait and see. So let's monitor the situation because things are already escalating as we speak. We have the G7 meeting to discuss even more sanctions on Russia. In fact, they have raised the support to Ukraine to $39 billion in 2023, and they are asking the IMF to join in by end March. So more money is going to point to the conflict from both sides, and as we have discussed earlier, this is very inflationary. Now, Russia themselves are also making moves on the world stage. We have Putin and President Xi of China about to meet, confirming their ties are rock solid. So three things are crystal clear going forward. Inflation is not going back down to 2% anytime soon. definitely not within the next 12 months, and we can prepare for more supply chain disruptions, especially if the G7 slaps another round of sanctions on Russia or even China. And finally, higher inflation could push the Federal Reserve to overcalibrate and keep rates higher for longer. So I really think it's not wrong to start preparing for a recession. And I'll leave you with a final quote from Putin about cause and effect. Those who initiated the sanctions are punishing themselves. They sent prices soaring in their own countries, destroyed jobs, forced companies to close, and caused an energy crisis. So let me know what you think. How will the conflict evolve? Will Putin's plan to deglobalize the world actually work? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.